The iridium layer sits at exactly 74 centimeters below the surface in sediment cores extracted from Lake Quetzalcoatl in central Mexico, from Greenland ice sheets, from Belgian peat bogs, and from the floors of the Arabian Sea. It is the same depth everywhere, the same concentration, the same chemical signature, the same year, 10,900 BC. Geologist Dr. James Kennett at the University of California, Santa Barbara confirmed this in 2007. His team pulled cores from across 4 continents and found a band of material so anomalous, so uniform, and so globally distributed that the only mechanism capable of depositing it simultaneously across every landmass on Earth is an impact event of near civilizational extinction scale. They published it in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and the same universities that buried this research are the ones writing the textbooks your children are reading right now. If you are only hearing about this today, that is not because the research was obscure. It is because the research was inconvenient for the people who decide what is true. The Sumerian King List, a cuneiform document currently housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, under catalog reference AN 1923.444, divides all of recorded human civilization into exactly 2 eras. The language it uses for the dividing line is not metaphorical. It does not say a great change came. It says the sky turned black, fire fell, and then the flood swept everything that had existed before into silence. That document is 4,000 years old. The iridium layer it is describing is 12,900 years old, and they match. If you are not already subscribed, I genuinely cannot explain why not. What is happening in this video is not theory. It is 2 independent records of the same physical event, separated by thousands of years, converging on the same date, the same atmospheric fingerprint, the same civilizational silence. Subscribe now, because what comes next is the part that was almost not allowed to be published. It is the autumn of 2006. Dr. Wendy Wolbach is at her desk at DePaul University in Chicago. She has spent 4 months analyzing carbon samples extracted from the Younger Dryas boundary layer, the same iridium-bearing sediment that Kennett's team is examining simultaneously across the Pacific coast. The room is cold, Chicago October cold, the kind that gets into the walls of old buildings. Her desk lamp is the only warm light in the lab. She is looking at a concentration of elemental carbon, soot, that is unlike anything in the standard geological record. The soot in this layer is not from a volcanic eruption. Volcanic soot has a different isotopic signature. What she is looking at is the chemical residue of continental-scale wildfires. Fires so large, so simultaneous, that they left a carbon layer measurable on every continent that has been tested. She knows what she is looking at before she writes it down. The note she makes in her lab book reads, "Biomass burning, global scale, synchronous onset." That phrase, synchronous onset, means every continent caught fire at the same time. She picks up the phone and calls Kennett. That call and the data she had just documented became part of the foundational evidence for what is now called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The layer Wolbach identified at DePaul University is now confirmed in peer-reviewed literature to contain not only carbon soot, but platinum group elements, shocked quartz, magnetic spherules, and Lonsdaleite, the hexagonal nanodiamond that forms only under the pressure of a hypervelocity cosmic impact. This is the moment the story changes. Everything before this was the setup. Because here is what was sitting in a museum in Oxford at the same time Wolbach was identifying synchronous global fire in a sediment layer. The Sumerian text, known as the Iridium-Genesis, first translated by Dr. Thorkel Jacobson at the Oriental Institute in Chicago in 1930, contains a section that describes the period immediately before the flood event in specific physical terms. The sky, the text states, was darkened, not by night, by something that covered the sun for an extended period. The scribes who recorded this did not describe it as a divine metaphor. They described it in the same grammatical construction they used to record agricultural yields and astronomical observations. They were making a technical record. And the technical record states the sky went dark before the water came. That sequence, darkness, then flood, is exactly what a global impact winter followed by rapid ice melt would produce. Dr. Andrew Moore at Rochester Institute of Technology spent 17 years excavating the site of Abu Huraira in Syria, a settlement that was continuously occupied for approximately 3,000 years before the Younger Dryas boundary layer. At the boundary layer, the exact same iridium-bearing sediment band identified in Mexico and Belgium and Greenland, Moore found something that stopped his excavation entirely for 3 days. The settlement had been simultaneously burned and buried under water-laid sediment in a single depositional event. Not gradually, not in phases, one moment. He published it in the journal Scientific Reports in 2020. The paper documents the presence of melt glass, silicon-rich material that forms when surface temperatures exceed 2,000 degrees Celsius inside the destruction layer at Abu Huraira. Above the melt glass, the settlement restarts. Different pottery, different tools, different people. Same location, complete civilizational replacement in one event. Stop. Before I continue, you need to understand what that number actually means. 2,000 degrees Celsius at the surface, the temperature of an industrial furnace, achieved in an open field in northern Syria 12,900 years ago in a fraction of a second by an airburst detonation, not by any volcanic, tectonic, or human process, only by a cosmic impact delivering kinetic energy so concentrated that it converted the surface itself into glass. And the civilization that was living there, the one that burned and was buried and was replaced, the cultural descendants of that replacement culture are the ones who eventually wrote it down. They called it the blackening of the sky. They called it fire from above. They called it the flood that swept everything before it into silence. The Akkadian text, known as the Atrahasis epic, dated to approximately 1700 BC, but documented by Dr. W. G. Lambert at the University of Birmingham to draw on source material at least 2,000 years older, contains a passage that has no parallel in any other ancient literature. Before the flood, the text states, the land was covered in silence. Not darkness this time, silence. Picture it. A person is standing outside at Abu Huraira. It is morning, the light is low and amber through the dust of an ordinary day. There are dogs somewhere nearby, there are always dogs. Children's voices from inside a structure, a goat pulling at something dry near the wall. And then a pressure arrives in the air that is not sound yet, a compression that hits the chest before the ears can process it, and then the shock wave passes. And after it passes, nothing. No dogs, no children, no goat, no birds, because the birds had already stopped 3 seconds before the humans noticed anything was wrong. The silence that follows a shockwave of that scale is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of everything that was making sound no longer being capable of it. The person standing at Abu Huraira that morning did not reach for a weapon or run toward the sound. They stood completely still in the total absence of every auditory signal their nervous system had ever used to understand the world, and they understood, not as a thought, but as a physical sensation moving through their body, that the world they had known until that moment was gone. The scribes who eventually recorded the Atrahasis epic were not writing poetry. They were writing a survival report. Most people watching this will miss what just happened there. Now here is the mechanism by which that survival report was kept from the physical evidence for the last century. What the official record states here is technically accurate. It is also deliberately incomplete. When Dr. Jacobson published his translation of the Iridium-Genesis in 1939, and when subsequent cuneiform scholars, including Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer at the University of Pennsylvania, spent decades establishing the academic consensus that Sumerian flood texts were mythological, they were not lying. They were operating inside a framework that had no category for what the physical evidence now shows. The framework said ancient people did not have science, they had religion. Religious texts contain metaphor. Metaphor is not evidence. That framework is now being demolished by the sediment record, one core sample at a time. Demolished. And the people whose careers were built on that framework did not respond by updating their position. They did what established academic structures always do when a foundational assumption is challenged. They contested the methodology, rejected the framing, and ensured the research appeared in journals with lower citation reach than the journals that published the critical responses. Dr. Nicholas Pinter at the University of California, Davis sits at his desk in the winter of 2010. His office is the particular kind of cluttered that signals a working academic, papers stacked in towers that only their owner can navigate, a cold cup of coffee near the monitor. He is writing the commentary that will appear in Nature the following year, targeting the methodology of the Kennett team's nano-diamond identification. As he types, he is aware the piece will be published in the highest visibility journal in science. He does not pause. He submits it. Kennett's rebuttal, vindicating the methodology in full, was published in the Journal of Quaternary Science. Nature's readership, approximately 500,000 researchers. Journal of Quaternary Science's readership, approximately 12,000. The criticism reached 500,000 people. The vindication reached 12,000. This is not a conspiracy. It is a structural feature of how scientific publishing works, and it operates with mechanical reliability every time a finding threatens a foundational consensus. The silencing that began with that 2011 Nature commentary has not ended. As of this video, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains listed as a contested hypothesis in the majority of introductory geology textbooks in use at English-speaking universities. Students learning geology today are being taught that the disappearance of the Clovis people and the mass extinction of North American megafauna at 10,900 BC is a subject of ongoing debate, with no consensus on cause. There is a consensus. It exists in over 150 peer-reviewed papers from 31 research institutions across 9 countries, confirmed by independent teams at Harvard, Columbia, the University of Edinburgh, and Lund University in Sweden. It is simply not the consensus that appears in the textbooks your children are reading today. The mainstream version ends here. The documented version does not. Because the iridium layer and the carbon soot and the nanodiamonds and the melt glass are not the only physical record that converges at 10,900 BC, they are the scientific record. The written record is older, wider, and more specific than most researchers in either field have been willing to acknowledge in the same paper. The Abu Huraira site in Syria, where Moore found the melt glass layer, is now underwater. The Assad Reservoir, created by the Tabqa Dam constructed in 1974, submerged the site permanently. Moore completed his excavation before the flooding, but the physical location where the Abu Huraira site in Syria, where Moore found the melt glass layer, is now underwater. The Assad Reservoir, created by the Tabqa Dam constructed in 1974, submerged the site permanently. Moore completed his excavation before the flooding, but the physical location where the impact layer is preserved is inaccessible. It has been inaccessible since 1974. No independent verification of Moore's stratigraphic findings is now possible without draining a reservoir that supplies water to 3 million people. Göbekli Tepe, 40 kilometers from the Syrian border in southeastern Turkey, was deliberately buried by its own builders approximately 10,000 years ago. The burial is total, methodical, and unexplained by any mainstream archaeological framework. The builders filled the enclosures with rubble and walked away. Dr. Klaus Schmidt, who excavated the site from 1996 until his death in 2014, stated publicly that no currently accepted theory of hunter-gatherer social organization can account for the construction, use, and deliberate abandonment of Göbekli Tepe. The site sits inside the same geographic corridor as the Sumerian settlements. It predates them by at least 3,000 years, and it was sealed permanently, deliberately, by the people who built it, within a few centuries of the Younger Dryas boundary. As if they knew something was coming and decided to bury the record before it arrived. I almost removed this next section. I should not have considered it. What the Sumerian king list records in the section describing the period after the flood is a rebuilding, kings with human-length reigns, cities founded rather than refounded, agricultural systems that appear with no developmental sequence, fully formed and functional within a few generations of the civilizational gap. Dr. Juris Zarins at Missouri State University published findings in 1992 noting the organizational sophistication of the earliest Younger Dryas Sumerian settlements had no discernible developmental precursor. His explanation that a pre-Younger Dryas civilization of considerable sophistication was destroyed in the event and that survivors rebuilt from retained knowledge rather than from scratch was categorized in academic reviews as speculative. The iridium layer does not categorize it as speculative. What the physical record has now established across 4 continents, across 31 institutions, across 17 years of independent confirmation is this. A cosmic impact of global scale occurred at 10,900 BC, produced simultaneous continental fires, a global impact winter, catastrophic flooding, and a civilizational gap visible in the archaeological record of every culture that survived it. And the oldest written civilization in documented human history recorded this event in technical language, in clay tablets, in a museum in Oxford, where it has been sitting for a century waiting for the sediment record to catch up. There is one more thing. In 2004, a Sumerian tablet held in the public collection of the Oriental Institute in Chicago, a tablet that had been accessible to any visitor for 60 years, cataloged and photographed and partially translated, was reclassified. The decision was made by the Institute's registrar. The reclassification moved the tablet from the public research catalog to the restricted access collection, available only to credentialed scholars with formal institutional affiliation and documented research purpose. The reclassification was processed on a Thursday in March. It happened 14 months after an independent researcher submitted a paper connecting the tablet's content to the physical signature of the Younger Dryas boundary event. The paper was never published. The tablet is still restricted. Whatever is written on it was readable by anyone who walked into that building for 6 decades. Now, it is not.